Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you. I'm so glad you have joined us for today's session. And as you all know, at Little Leaps, our intention is always to bring thoughtful research and thoughtful conversations that is bridging research and practice that supports both parents and educators in meaningful ways. Today, we are exploring a very powerful and foundational topic, Montessori language to literacy mastery. Language is at the heart of human connection, and in the Montessori approach, it is carefully nurtured through movement, sensorial experiences, rich vocabulary, and purposeful engagement. In this session, we will reflect on how early language experiences shape literacy development, what true literacy mastery looks like in a Montessori environment, and how both home and school can support this journey. And for that, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Susan Zoll. Dr. Zoll is an internationally respected Montessori researcher, associate professor at Rhode Island College, author, and literacy advocate. Her work thoughtfully bridges research, teacher preparation, and classroom practice, advancing learner-centered education across early childhood settings. She has co-authored 3 books so far, and I want to congratulate her on the launch of her latest book, Implementing the Montessori Method, Learner-Centered Education from Birth Through Adolescence. It's a comprehensive and insightful guide to authentic Montessori practice. So, Susan, we are truly honored to have you with us today on Little Leaps. Thank you for joining. I know you have a presentation to share with us, but before you do that, I would like you to give a brief about your journey so far and what inspired you to write these books and what made you connect Montessori practices with language and literacy development.
So I have a little bio slide that I significant stuff. But this study, it looked at children who were also able to take in a second language prior to being born. So let's be clear, they're not necessarily learning the language, but their brains are creating neural pathways that we can further develop once they're born. And this is a developmental continuum, right? I like this one. So we've just talked about what happens before birth, but we know that children move from, and Dr. Montessori called all of this long before, formal research and cognitive development and neuroscience. Dr. Montessori knew that from birth to age 6 that there was an explosion into language. And so what this continuum shows us, and why I use this continuum, is it shows that there's a continuum for language of multiple languages. That is a power source to be fluent in more than one language. So children are taking in the language, they hear around them, that's their receptive language. In time, they begin their expressive language skills. First, they're babbling. Then they're beginning to say their first words. Then they're combining those words to more complex sentences. That's our work in the infant, toddler, and children's house stages. And certainly language, we're still language learners, right? We have not forgotten all of those things. We are still language learners. This is just looking from birth to 6. So what does research say is required for literacy mastery? Here are these 2 pieces of research that we'll look at. One is called The Simple View of Reading, and the other is called Scarborough's Reading Rope. Here's a simple view of reading, and it's just that. It's simple. If you want to read more about it, it's in the first book. So it says that there are 2 main components if we want successful readers. The first piece is around language comprehension, right? What we're going to talk about today. The other part is about decoding, right? How we get to the part where we can actually read or sound out each of the sounds in a word, each of the phonemes. That helps us to get to reading comprehension, right? We need both of those, because if I have language comprehension, I have a wonderful array of vocabulary, but I am not able to decode those phonemes, those sounds into words, I don't have reading comprehension. And the inverse is also true. If I don't have a wide array of vocabulary, but I can decode words, it doesn't matter that I can sound out and read those words if I don't understand the meaning, right? I then, again, will not have reading comprehension. Here's the second one I wanted to show you. This is a woman by the name of Hollis Scarborough, a scholar from Yale University. She took those 2 areas. There's the language comprehension. There's the word recognition. And then she broke it down into strands: background knowledge, language structures, vocabulary, verbal reasoning, literacy knowledge. Those are all part of language comprehension. And then word recognition, that's that decoding, phonological awareness, and sight word knowledge. Okay, so this is what that book is created using, our first book. Each of those strands is a chapter in the book, and you can read more about the connections between research and what happens in the classroom. We're going to look at language comprehension today, and there's a note in the corner. Most times this is associated with readers, but this is even before children begin to read, okay, that we can think about all of these components. This is what we need to be working on to help them to be strong readers. So now we're going to make this connection. Now we're making the switch. How are we going to do this, both in our classrooms and at home? We're going to talk about vocabulary, we're going to talk about letter sounds, comprehension, and learning environments. We're going to do that quickly so we have time to chat. So vocabulary. Montessori classrooms have these beautiful classification cards, these 3-part cards that young children can match the images. So before they can read, they can match both images. Older children can then match the labels. They can then read booklets to expand the vocabulary with short definitions. And we even have these beautiful Who Am I cards to help children begin to infer from the text, right? The answers aren't written there. They have to begin to infer. This helps to build children's background knowledge and their comprehension skills. And if you work with very young children, let's be sure to give them the correct terminology. When you're out for a walk and the child points to a creature that's flown close to where you're sitting, what do you refer to it? Is it a bird? Let's not just say, "Oh, did you see the bird flying by?" Instead, let's say, Oh, that beautiful bird is a cardinal. Look at its red feathers. That's how we build children's reservoir of vocabulary. It's not just one word, bird. It could be a multitude of words based on what we are seeing. Let's give children correct terminology. And while we're out and about at the park or outdoors, um, what if we went on nature walks? This actually came from community playthings, and I thought it was a brilliant idea. Um, Science, the environment are great ways, perfect ways to build children's vocabulary and background knowledge, key elements to understanding text later when they're reading. So you're going to notice that the children have these bracelets that they've made. It's packing tape that's been placed with the sticky side outside. On their walk, they can pick up leaves, twigs, parts of flowers that they find of interest. And you're going to hear me say that they find of interest. We build on children's interest. So this isn't just about creating a keepsake. It's about children noticing, it's about their connection to the natural world, and it builds fine motor growth as they're picking up the items, sensory engagement, the textures of what they pick up, the colors, the shapes, the scents. There's early science thinking. They're feeling the weight, the stickiness. We're beginning to classify this. There's language development with all of the correct terminology. Right? We are enhancing children's interest in learning. And then we as educators, we need to then make further connections. If we don't know the name of that plant, we need to go and explore it. Can we find it or make connections to classification cards, labeling and offering children correct terminology of parts of a flower, sharing parts of a leaf card and booklets? Can we bring out our botany cabinet? These materials are so important, and I want us to reflect for the educators and to ask yourself, you don't have to write in the chat or respond to me, but how often are we referencing these materials in our work with children? I know that you're using the sandpaper letters, and I know that you're using the movable alphabet. We have to give at least equal time. And I would say for the younger children, even more so, this whole piece around language materials and language development. And then a word that Montessorians don't care for, but I feel would make us stronger as a field is how are we assessing learning? There's one tool that I have used. I very much stand behind it. It's called the PPVT, the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test. It looks at children's receptive language. There are 4 images on a page. A child points to it. They don't have to say it. They just have to point. And it gives us information about their receptive language. Children who are almost 3, up through adults, you and I can take this test as well. It only tests in English. There is a version for Spanish that I'm aware of. But it gives us something that we as Montessorians do not have. We don't have data that the rest of the world of education understands, right? And this tool would do that. We use terms like explosion into language and cosmic education, but the traditional world of education doesn't understand that language. They understand this language. This is what data looks like from the PPVT. All data tells a story, but we need to be able to speak the language of research in order to be understood. And one more piece about this, if there is some belief that children have time, yes, this is probably true, especially for those children who have lots of opportunities. Their parents take them to the zoo or to the museum. They have lots of books in the home. There's rich literacy experiences in the home. Then you're right. These children have time. But for those children who are in under-resourced communities, whose families may not speak English and need additional support so children are successful in our country in English so they can be successful throughout their academic careers, here we wait. We wait until those 3rd grade reading outcomes, and we've lost all of this rich opportunity to build language and literacy skills. So I believe in working with children in a developmentally appropriate manner. Do not think that you won't see me ever sharing about a workbook for a child to do or to be mandating that children are doing particular work. What I do believe is that we should be offering children and building on the things that are of interest to them. So other ways that we can do this is called a learning story. It comes from New Zealand. It's where we could take a photo and add it. There's a little piece about what's happening in the classroom. This is your observations, right? We know that this child is 4.5 years old. He's in a pre-K classroom. This is my data. We're doing water play. The children have been working on the science experiment, and you're going to see that we've put in the top here, and you should do this with your lessons as well. What's your vocabulary that you're going to be focusing on? If we could focus on that in our work with children, what's your vocabulary? They were talking about goggles and funnels and plungers and eyedroppers. The children, so there's one little sentence here. The children extended their learning about predictions and experiments by using new tools in water play. And then we have to write in this other box here, why was this important? And so here's the little story. Felix began in our classroom only 8 weeks ago, having only spoken a language other than English at home. While working with the tools in water play, Felix, for the first time, asked to wear the goggles by saying the word and not just gesturing towards it. That was an important meaningful moment, right? He was learning a second language, in this case, English, and he used the words for the first time. So that's something that was easily done with your observations. I've placed an article from Reading Rockets that talks about which words should we choose to teach. I've also placed a quick little checklist and informal assessment around oral language development for children that you can use in your observations of children. And then letter sounds. This is where we get to word building, right? We begin with sandpaper letters. We move into movable alphabet. Why I wanted to highlight this is let's make sure as Montessorians, we spend lots of time in that encoding stage, that as a child makes a word, right, that they're writing the word with the movable alphabet pieces, letter symbols, that we're not asking them right away to decode, to read that word. We want that to naturally happen. I think that is a secret, special piece to Montessori language and why children learn to read so easily. Spend lots and lots of time on that encoding piece, making words, hearing each of those individual sounds, and using that movable alphabet. And again, what's your method of record keeping so children continue to move forward in their learning at their own pace? I've added another document. This is something that I developed. It was recognized by the U.S. Department of Education, Doing What Works. It's called a personal literacy plan. I'm happy to talk about any of these things. You can always email me later to find out more, but this is something that you can review and think about your own record keeping systems. So 3 strategies to build a love of language. Read aloud, daily lessons with Montessori language materials, and what's happening in your classroom environment to support language. So read aloud daily. Dialogic reading, it's research-based. We'll talk about it very briefly. Storytelling, movement and read alouds, conversational turns. What we want is to strive for 5 with conversation and building language with children, not just telling children to go line up at the door, to go hang up your coat, not just that functional language, but actual conversation, building on something that's an interest to the child and getting to an exchange of at least 5. We want to strive for 5. And what we need to do is to read to our children every day, 1 book. It will expose them to 78,000 words a year. And these words become foundational to future reading ability. In our 0 to 3 and 3 to 6 classrooms, we need to be flooding our children with language. Children's books have 50% more rare words in them than educated adults use when speaking aloud. The language of books is different than the language we speak every day. These rare words will create greater vocabulary and background knowledge, again, that's only going to support their reading development. Dialogic reading, in 4 little sentences, you read a book multiple times. Do you read every book multiple times? No, select books, those with really good vocabulary and background knowledge. The key is to focus on vocabulary, and that in time with multiple readings, you know that children will begin to say aloud because they remember how that sentence ends. What we want to do is to turn over ownership of that book to the child. Either they're retelling it with little characters or they're retelling it by dressing up. But we want the child to be able to understand the characters, the beginning, the middle, and the end of a story. And that happens really through a research ability through dialogic reading. Our daily lessons, make sure that we're using our language materials, right? It is a strength of our curriculum. Vocabulary is integrated throughout our curriculum. Using your classification, your 3-part cards to build vocabulary, beginning with your youngest children, right? Even your toddlers could do the matching of the photos and we could be sharing the words with them. Pair pictures and cards and labels, the home environment, what's in the classroom, what's in their community, what's in their world. Maitri Learning has beautiful materials. I've actually added a discount for her materials in the folder. AMI has a list that they've created of 3-part cards that you can find. They developed them during COVID. They're still available online. Neen House has some beautiful materials around collective nouns, animals in their homes, animals in the sounds they make. And are you familiar with this book? It's called A Mischief of Mice. That's the collective noun for mice. It's a wonderful book that highlights animals and their collective nouns. Here's one sentence from the book. As nighttime fell, the squirrels spied on a roost an ominous parliament of owls. I didn't know that a group of owls was a parliament of owls. But beautiful vocabulary in the book. And then your environment. Make sure that we're developing a cozy, welcoming reading area, books that reflect learning in all areas of the classroom. Choice, so not just a library area. Do you have some books about math in the math area? Do you have some books about construction or architecture that might be in the sensorial area? What books can we connect to our learning areas? Then there are assessments that you could use also around literacy in the environment. Which books? Books are mirrors when readers see their lives reflected in pages. Books are windows when they allow readers to view their own lives in stories that are different than their own. And books become sliding glass doors when readers feel transported into the world of the story, when they feel empathy for their characters. Create books about children's families. Choose books that are picture books and wordplay. Not a Stick is about Piglet who uses a stick, but it becomes a sword or a fishing pole or a paintbrush. There are narrative books and chapter books. Nonfiction text builds academic language. So these informational books are very important. And here are some sites that you could explore about list of books that you could find that are appropriate for your classroom. Create a special reading area. Is there a writing area? I know this isn't a Montessori classroom, but do we have a dedicated writing area? Do we have lots of paper and materials for children to write with that are readily available? Is there a dedicated story writing area? Is there an area for children for a listening center where they could listen to books on tape? Or do we record them actually, and we can create our own for them to listen to in the reading area? And our words that we have been talking about in the classroom, in their explorations, can they find them somewhere close by to reference? There is a checklist. There are 2 checklists from Get Ready to Read that I've added to that same folder. And one is a checklist for classrooms. One is a checklist for your home. How is your environment promoting children's language and literacy development? And then our own assessments. Gather your observations and other data. Review it, evaluate it, understand what it is that children are learning, and then where do they need additional support? That's where you're going to place your planning. Are they retaining sounds? If not, which ones are they not? Let's go back and review them. Or they are. Now what do we do as a next step? And then we implement it and revise. This is a cycle. It's iterative. We keep going back to it. I just did that really fast. So are you ready? Here are all those things that are going to be linked. Get your cameras ready. And I'm going to show you the QR code. At the top, if you don't have a smartphone to collect these documents, there is the HTTPS at the top there next to handouts. You can just write that down and then you can access the materials. And then thank you. That's how you can contact me. First is my Gmail. The second is my website. If you have any questions, with me, I'm happy to resend. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And let's see, did any of that resonate?
A lot. A lot of it resonated.
Oh,
Thank you for your presentation.
it was a lot of content.
what was interesting is that as much as we focus a lot in 3 to 6 environments, especially with the picture cards, and then we go to pictures with a little bit of text and all of that. But in a 0 to 3 environment, we do a lot more of concrete learning. So it is more of a two-dimensional picture along with a three-dimensional object, so that children have a
Yes,
concrete understanding of the object and how it looks as a picture. And that is when it progresses into the 3 to 6 environment, where they understand the image itself is, as an object or as a person or whatever it is. So it's a beautiful, progression of learning literacy. And oh, Jose has raised his hand. So Jose, yeah, you can unmute yourself and share your views.
Thank you, Madhuri, and thank you so much, Dr. Zoll, for this great intro and so inspiring. Just a couple of questions that resonate a lot to me about your presentation. The first one is how children use language to communicate everything, and even in very difficult circumstances, like, for example, the pandemic, the COVID. I remember an experience, a pilot I did in a museum. We use language to invite children to express their emotions and feelings about the isolation they lived during the pandemic. And it was incredible because behind this was this concept that you mentioned about build words and build the language, very hands-on. The invitation was choose your favorite word, even you can invent or create a word, and they invented, to express your feelings about how are you feeling about what is happening. It was amazing. They create like a kind of dictionary. We build with all the words an exhibition, and then they express the words were the entry point to develop different creative languages. So some of them they move from the word to a cook recipe, another ones to create a choreography, a poem, a draw. So it was like a kind of creative entry point. But I am interested to know a little bit what do you think about this strong relation between the inner world of the child and the language, because language creates reality. So this is so important to think about this. And the second very brief point is what is your opinion about in the new artificial intelligence era? Some research are telling us that there is a strong dynamic behind the artificial intelligence and language learning models to flatter the language and give us all like a kind of the same words to express. And I know that so many children will start to learn language through language learning models. How do you think this can affect this process of language learning in the future by erasing the diversity, important diversity of language that you mentioned in your presentation, that is pivotal to learn a language? How can this affect to the children when they start to learn the same words always, or very similar words? And how can this affect their imagination and their competence to use a language properly? But thank you very much for this wonderful presentation, and so inspiring. Thank you.
So, Jose, you and I knew we would have long conversations. What you have posed in 2 simple questions, quote unquote simple, is far from simple, especially the second one. The first one I'm going to try to retain. You had like 3 parts to that first question. The part that I started, and I wish I had began, I have to write in order to keep track of things. But I kept the part about the inner world of the child. Oh, and I wanted to make connections to Project Zero, Ben Mardell, storytelling. Okay, so here's what I can make connections to. And you and I might need to do a separate email, or anyone else who's interested. So there is a project out of Harvard University called Project Zero. Project Zero worked with Reggio Emilia. And it's been a long-term relationship between the two. Ben Mardell is a colleague of mine. We've worked with him in Massachusetts, in Rhode Island. One of the things I wanted to talk about with that is we want to build on what children know. I want to go back to what you talked about with the museum, and I'll ask this question while it's in my head at the moment. If there's anything that you have that you could share, a link to the project, to the museum work that was done, an article or anything, I would love to have a copy of that. I would love to be able to read through it. Project Zero has done some of that with children. We did it simply just in our community. So children who were in not to the depths of what was happening during COVID, during the pandemic, or other instances with children, such as what children might be experiencing through war right now, opportunities for them to share things that were meaningful to them. And so they created something called, I'm not going to get the title correctly. It's like they were the masters of how to whistle, how to swing on a swing, how to write my name. They wrote a small book. They drew pictures. Someone helped them to write out the words, and they created small books that were then introduced in a big event at a local children's museum. Teachers, children, families. The mayor wrote a book, How to Be a Mayor of Providence, Rhode Island. The community became involved, and it really elevated children's feelings. Now, if we go back to these inner feelings, the thing that comes to mind for me, I have seen drawings that have come out of the period of 9/11, children's drawings, and the impact of what happened here in the United States for children who experienced that in New York. There is a previous researcher, Lev Vygotsky. He talks about the language of the inner world of the child. I love his work. It reminds me of my brother when he was little, and he would play with little army guys and his Matchbox little cars. And there was a world going on, and that world was all internal. Every now and then some words would come out, right? But these young children, preschoolers, even younger, there's a whole world happening internally, right? They're taking in words. And it takes a while for those words to become express, right? Before those words come out. And Lev Vygotsky spends time on that, drawing and acting out with whatever things might be in a play environment for a child are a way for those words to be expressed prior to there being words. So they can be expressed through art. They can be expressed through play. And then in time, we help them. Our job is to be noticing, to be observing. What words can we attach to that? And then not just words, how can we help, especially in moments when it's traumatic events that children might be experiencing? Then how do we connect them to those things to help and to heal that trauma? So very powerful stuff. The thing around AI, I will just say about that, because that's years worth of work that we're going to have to focus on. Flattening language, I think, is very important. I think before we offer children AI opportunities, large language models, apps on our phones, we have to entice them. Isn't that what Montessori like? Oh, what's in the mystery bag, right? There's so much great drama in a Montessori classroom, the great stories, right? Cosmic education, great drama. We have to entice children through beautiful vocabulary, offering them a wide vocabulary. If you speak more than one language in your home, offer them the language in your home language, offer them the language that will help them to be successful in school. But let's offer them a wide range, and I hope that came across in this presentation. Give them all the correct terminology. If they are entranced by words, by books, they will be able to use the tools that are going to be part of their world. But let's not begin by flattening their vocabulary. Let's give them and give it a wide range before they have opportunities to know, oh yeah, I already know that word, right? That's being used by this LLM. But I also know that not just this word, but here's 5 more that might better describe whatever it is I want to say. Does that help at all, or does that attach to what you were hoping?
Yeah, absolutely, Dr. Phil. Thank you very much. I put on the chat the article we
Oh, great.
published describing this experience with children and in this pandemic context. And you can see all the incredible findings, because also was a dynamic that we invite artists to dialogue with the children, to co-create together. And what was fascinating was that artists discover new words, new
I love
languages
that.
through
I love
this interaction, and they even start to try new techniques and new concepts and new words. So
Yes.
it's so powerful, the language per se as a creative tool. And that's my fear about this language learn model flaw, because it's so, let's say, lowering the bar.
It is lowering the bar across the board. If I have a limited language, I will have a limited capacity for learning. There is a direct correlation to vocabulary development and the array of words that I can use in order to then, it is, there's something called, oh, come on, Susan, grab it. I can see the research. The Matthew effect is what it's called. I can't recall the researcher who does it, but I'm sure you can look it up, called the Matthew effect in language development. And it's drawing from literally Matthew from like the Bible, the Christian Bible, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. The same thing is true of language development. It's not, I learn one word and I can learn another word. For every word a child learns, they can learn a multitude of more words. It is like a snowball effect. So yes, we do not want to diminish language. We want to, from the very beginning, even when we think they don't understand, we want to be giving them correct terminology and simple descriptions of that language. I saw someone also, thank you so much, Jose. I see a question, how can we encourage free creative expression with movable alphabets? So as a Montessorian, I would say, let's stick to the process of how we've been trained, right? Let's use the movable alphabet as children. Well, my mind went to something else here for a second. Okay, let me stay on this track here. Let's follow how we've been trained, that children are first making connections to the symbols from the sandpaper letters to the movable alphabet, and then from the movable alphabet to being able to sound out the individual phonetic words, 3 and 4 phonetic words, maybe using objects, as Midori said, maybe using picture cards in time. And then we get to this piece about expression, free creative expression. Let's first give children lots of opportunity. If by that you mean free creative expression to write a small paragraph or a short sentence, and they are using spelling that the word sounds like and is not necessarily the correct spelling of the word, absolutely, that is the whole part of the process. You, as the educator, should be paying attention to where children may not be spelling the word correctly with the movable alphabet, because that gives you a clue on what's a lesson that that child might need. And the second part that my brain was going to simultaneously is, I'm getting to a point in my teaching that I didn't do when I was a younger teacher in the classroom, where I would wait for quite a number of sandpaper letters to be known before I would move to the movable alphabet, before I would move to phonetic books. I now think that we should be thinking about the movable alphabet as soon as we have enough letters to begin that process of moving to the movable alphabet to make words. That I want to make sure that that first experience of the movable alphabet is only using those letters that children have already mastered. But we don't need to know 17 letter sounds to begin the movable alphabet. We may only need to know 6, right? And so what are those letter sounds that we can put together and then begin the alphabet, and then into phonetic reading as encoding changes into decoding naturally with children. So that would be my recommendation. And then we could go to creative after that is really well established.
Thank you for your questions, everyone. In addition to Jose's question with technology, I just wanted to ask another question. I just wanted to add this. I see that children are very, used to accessing screen these days, even as young as an 18-month-old or a 20-month-old child, also because of unavailability of parents or, maybe less time. I really don't know the exact reason, but yes, children are given this access to screen at a very young age. Now, when they start, and we have seen in Montessori environments that these children, when they come in the environment, they don't make eye contact, and language needs a bit of eye contact, right? So there is definitely language delay, and not just language delay, we see that it is coming in different forms of behavioral changes as well. And then as this child grows, as much as we are putting in effort for these children to learn language, with the help of technology, now children are even typing messages in shorthands, or they already get the words and suggestions of correct words. So they don't. Autocorrection is actually limiting their learning. As I said, a limited language leads to limited learning, but this technology is also adding up to that. So how do we protect these children from, over usage of screen? Because it's too difficult. I mean, it's getting too difficult. We try as much as to, communicate this to parents, saying that, please keep your children away of the screen, but not happening. What else can we do in order to encourage these children to develop this love for language learning?
I saw that there were a number of people on the LinkedIn I could see who signed up for the session, who were heads of school or who were program directors of multiple schools. I think that I believe very strongly in developing strong family engagement, authentic family engagement opportunities. I'm not here to say that technology is bad. That's not my role, right? And that's a parent's decision. But as an educator, I think that we can do a much better job of not just telling parents to not, because when we tell a child, don't do this, right? What do we do? For them to be successful, what we do is we want to inspire them by things that they can do as an alternative that says, here are 5 upcoming sessions during the school year where we're going to help you to build language development. We're going to do something around dialogic reading. We're going to do something about the identifying the materials in your home and how you might do that to build vocabulary. Or the next time spring vacation is coming up and you might be traveling somewhere, and here's what you might want to consider if you're going to the beach or whatever. What connections can we make to fill the skills of the family? Not just telling them, no, don't do this. But let's explain to them why that may not be the best in their child's development. All families, all parents want to do what's best for their child. Our job is to help them to know developmentally what are those best ways to do that.
Yes, that's true. We have Maham with another question. She's asking, when we do reach the creative expression stage, in what other ways can we inspire them for creative expression, like writing stories, messages, etc.?
So you heard me say several times in the session, and I will continue to say it. And if you question why I say it, you can look at the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard University. If we want children to learn, right, some of what we want to do, that Strive for 5, that piece around conversation and building conversation, we want to build on what children's interests are. So what are they interested in? If you see that they have an interest in cars, if you see that they have an interest in even a cartoon character. What is their interest right now? Let's begin there for their creative writing. Do they want to write a message to their favorite superhero? Personally, I'm less interested in the method of connection. I want to be writing. I have that creative writing opportunity. And what they choose as a subject, it has to come from the child. It can't be that an adult will look at a child and say, okay, here's the movable alphabet, write a story today. Or here, write a message to your friend. Let's begin with what's of real interest to them. And maybe it begins with a book. And maybe they're extending. One thing that we used to do in our classroom, it was a job. The job was that like there would be someone who would straighten out the books in the library, and someone who would push them the chairs, and someone who would, a few children who would dust the shelves at the end of the day or the beginning of the day. One of the jobs I made was for children at the end of our story time. One child would choose the favorite part of their story, and they would draw that. If they were able to, with the movable alphabet, describe what that drawing was from the story that we read, great. If they needed help, they would dictate it to myself or my assistant teacher, and we would write it out for them. And then this became something that we cataloged. We either had it in a binder, or we might have it near the library area, but it was their representation of some part of the story. We have something around creativity, we have something around writing, we have something around art, and it was a job. And if a child didn't want that job for that week, that was okay. They could choose another job. But it was a way to make connections and to add creativity. Oh, you're welcome. I see. Thanks for sharing new methodology.
There is another common question that has been asked by many educators and parents. Like they all ask how to encourage language in bilingual or multilingual families. And most of the families struggle because they want their children, especially in our country, I've seen parents want their children to learn English, but they also want children to learn their mother tongue. And they go simultaneously with both the languages. So what is the best, suggestion you would give? I mean, we keep saying one parent or one adult speaking in one language, and that's what encourages language in children. But I have seen parents coming with these concerns that, I'm trying to speak in my language, but my child is only picking English or maybe another mother tongue or something else, some other language. So how can we, communicate with parents that it's absolutely normal and children will get there with all the languages that they are introduced with?
So I saw that you had Margarita on recently. And so anybody who hasn't watched her session can look at that on YouTube, on your site. And she and I share a lot of the same philosophy. I am sadly to say monolingual English. I have some background in French, l'Académie de Saint-Joseph, as I was a student in school. But I believe wholeheartedly that we should be sharing multiple languages with children. There's something called, this is from research, called the critical age hypothesis. And it really replicates, again, what Dr. Maria Montessori said, but it goes a little deeper. And what it says in a nutshell, but I highly recommend you looking it up, is that before the age of like 10, 13, we all have the capacity to learn another language as if it's our first language. After that, can we learn a second language or a third language? Absolutely, we can learn. It just becomes more difficult, right? So the critical age hypothesis, and it shows very clearly by the time someone is an adult, their capacity for learning a second language literally falls off the scale, literally falls if you look at the data. It's very striking. But yet in the United States, it's foolish. We don't teach a second language until high school. Maybe they might get it earlier. Why are we not teaching multiple languages? I've taught students in Singapore. When I was at Wheelock College, I also did some international teaching. And I was astounded that most of my students, adult students, were speaking 4 languages, right? Because they had a home language. Singapore recognizes English as the home language. And then other languages are, what families bring. Terminology is a bit different. But I believe that the home language, the language of, your origin language, is so important. It's how culture gets exchanged. It only takes one generation to lose a language. So when families came to America and were forced to learn English, yes, we want them to be successful academically. So they had to learn English, but they would lose their home language very quickly. And then what did that do? It almost ostracized them from their grandparents, who weren't able to learn English as quickly as their younger grandchildren. And so there's this disconnect from their culture, from their language, from their experiences of who they are as a family. So how to go about maintaining multiple languages? Yes, if, and I've only read about a few instances, and it mostly works with the firstborn and not with multiple children because it just becomes too difficult to manage. If one parent who speaks one language, like the mom speaks Spanish, as an example, dad speaks English, if the mom, and this is how they interact with the children, they can follow through. Now, once that child is old enough and goes off to school and begins speaking in our country English more frequently, then the second child or third child comes along, it is so much more difficult. Now, to maintain that, it becomes more difficult for a family to maintain. But we have to be more cognizant. Do we have books in another language that we can be adding to our reading? So one way to know if they understand you isn't necessarily that they're saying it. You ask them to go and do something. If in your home language, which is bring their book over to you or their toy and put it back on the shelf, if they go and do that, we know that there's an understanding. There's receptive language. Expressive language is another stage. And I would, if it were me, I say this, but I didn't put it in practice, so you can take it with a grain of salt. I would say I would say in my home language that I'm sorry, I can't do that unless you respond to me in the same language I'm speaking. I would probably be a little bit difficult about it to try to keep up that expressive language or go and visit the country where the child would be immersed in that second language. So it's not an easy task. It can be done. It has to be very intentional. And all of the literacy things that we talked about, can you create 3-part cards that are in both languages? Can you find books that would be in multiple languages? Can you at home make sure that we're asking children not just receptively to hear the language, but to also give it back to you through expressive language? Yeah, it's not an easy process, but it is a superpower for everyone who's an adult who has this ability to speak more than one language. And I'm very sorry that I missed that opportunity myself.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And yeah, Margarita had a beautiful presentation to make us understand this whole thing. So those of you who are interested in understanding how to introduce multilingual environment in your home or school environment, please go ahead and have a watch. It's brilliant. We have last question coming from Maria, and she's asking how to help a struggling emergent reader in the lower elementary.
So Maria, I don't know where you are, but I'm going to do context, and I'm going to give it a U.S. context for Montessori public schools, because I am getting so many questions from leadership in public Montessori schools where here in the United States, funding at the federal or state level is for elementary Montessori. Sometimes it might also be for 4-year-olds, but not for 3-year-olds, or for 5-year-olds and not for 3 and 4. It's odd, but it's just how it's funded. So what does that mean if a public Montessori school has children that are entering at kindergarten or at first grade? What does that mean for that teacher? Those Montessori trained teachers are trained for elementary. They're trained for 6 to 12. They do not have that foundational information. That's the other thing about that third book is that I'm hoping that it's going to bring to light and help with policy here that those foundational skills, if the child who is coming to you as a kindergartner, as a 5-year-old or a first grader at 6 or 7 years old, if they don't have that foundation, language, letter sounds, phonetic words, encoding, decoding, if they don't have that, which is what's happening in our schools. And I'm not quite sure if that's what Maria is saying, but if they are struggling, the elementary teachers are going to have to become familiar with the language materials of the 3 to 6 classroom. And if they could focus on these key pieces that we just talked about, building language, continue with that. That doesn't stop at the end of Children's House. That continues for the rest of our lives. We're still learners. And if we could focus on phonetic sandpaper letters and then phonetic words and the movable alphabet and stress of that, we're going to have to think about that for those struggling lower elementary students. I think that those things align. I do. I still think those are still the foundational pieces. And Thailand is beautiful. One place for me to visit next.
it's the concerns are prevalent world over with the language. The language is changing among teenagers, especially. I see they prefer using brief, either sentences. And yesterday I was coming with my daughter, and she saw two girls walking by, and she comes and she tells me, "Oh my God, they look autistic." Just because they were weirdly dressed, she says they look autistic. I said, "That's not the right word." So she's like, "No, you don't understand, Mom. It's just the slang." So children, without even understanding, and she is like, "Please don't get into your Montessori self, where you start explaining me the meaning and asking me not to use and all those stuff." But the fact is that nowadays children are misusing and disrespecting people and the language itself. So we have to find a balance between how to encourage. And I think, as you said, it starts from very young. If we do it from before birth itself, we can see a change especially when they are in that phase of adolescence. So thank you, Susan, for your amazing presentation. And it had been a really, really fantastic and insightful session with you today. Thank you, all of you, for joining in today and taking in the experience shared by Susan herself.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And I will just add to what you were saying is, I think that just as children in our classrooms know that there is behavior that's acceptable in the classroom that may be the same or different than the experiences at home, right? They're different worlds. I think that same could be true of language. Yeah. There is the language of the academic world, of our classroom, and then there is the social language that helps them to feel belonging to their own adolescent group, as you're pointing out. So I think that I think they can live separately, but I don't think that we should ever ignore, and we should definitely focus on building children's language and their background knowledge.
Yes, and especially when they're using cuss words or slang language. I keep communicating to my daughter as well, saying that people use these kind of languages only when they have dearth of vocabulary, when they have limited vocabulary and they cannot express themselves. So try to expand it. If you expand it is when you don't need these words, these slangs to express yourself. You are pretty kind enough to communicate with a strong opinion and a point, right? So language makes so much difference, and it starts from very early on. Thank you, Susan. I really look forward to learning a lot from you and connecting with you again. And all of you who have attended this session, you can email me for the certificate given by Sarasota University. So please reach out to me and you can get the certificate for 1 hour workshop. So thank you, everyone. You have a great week. Yeah, lovely to see you all. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for your inputs. Thank you.